Okay, so this is Nothing Conversations, and I'm really glad that I have with me today Scott Kiloby because I've been helped by him emotionally and physically. Because the story about it is I heard his name from someone mentioning it when about trauma work, and at that time I felt the need to work with him, and I worked. I was able to release a lot of deficiency stories. Maybe we can talk about that later, and the physical pain as well. So good day, Scott. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, I'm really glad. And maybe we can start with how like your story. If you were when in the past when you were still a seeker, or how was it? Because before Kilobi inquiries, I'm sure there's a lot of work that was done for healing and for the seeker before in the prior to everything right now. Is it okay if you can share whatever
Yeah,
you want to share
abs-
about it? Yeah.
absolutely. I guess in some ways I was probably always seeking, even before I was a spiritual seeker, because I was a drug addict. So I was seeking the next high, the next fix, trying to escape most of my life. But so my path was addiction. That's how I got into spirituality, is through getting clean and sober when I was 34, off of painkillers and alcohol, which had gotten really bad. And so that was my first introduction, really. Although I read some books on enlightenment for like 2 weeks when I was clean in my early 20s. For 2 weeks, I stopped doing drugs somehow in my early 20s. And then for 2 weeks, all I did was read in books about enlightenment. And then I started getting high again and forgot about that. And then 10 years later is when I finally got off the pills and the alcohol. And as soon as I did, so it seems like as soon as I would put the drugs and alcohol away, the spiritual seeking would come up. And it did. And so 12-step program first, going to meetings, trying to stay clean and sober, fellowship, all that stuff. And they introduced me to the notion that there could be a spiritual awakening, although they didn't really illuminate that very well for me, like what that actually looks like. And so I just started looking all over the world. Back then they had bookstores, I'm sure there are a few out there, but Amazon now, but back then going into bookstores and cities and just going to the spiritual or the self-help, but mostly the spiritual section, and just looking and looking and looking. And I read a lot of books. The first one that I picked up that made an impact was a book called Intro to Buddhism, and it just talked about the present moment being the absolute. And I had no idea what that meant, but it felt right. I didn't know what it meant really. But it wasn't until I read Eckhart Tolle's book, and I was just in a bookstore one day and I saw The Power of Now, and I thought, okay, so that pulled me for some reason. As soon as I opened the book, immediately I noticed that he was speaking like in plain English. I liked that about it. It's just like he was simplifying this whole thing about enlightenment down. And I had already tried at that point so many other things, like positive thinking things and the secret manifesting this or that, or obviously 12 step, Christianity, um, therapy, bunch of different stuff. So I was at the place where I was ready to hear the message of non-duality. So once I got a hold of Eckhart's book, I would say like I was eating books. I wasn't reading them. I just ate them. Like they were everywhere, by my toilet, by my bed, by the chair in the living room. And I was just reading constantly and watching videos. I never worked with a teacher, but I was very intensely seeking. That's for sure. I was like, if there are levels of seeking energy, like DEFCON 4, that's me. um, just high level intensity around seeking. My entire life became devoted to recognizing awareness, coming back to recognize awareness and noticing thoughts and feeling feelings. So the good thing that happened early on in that is that I didn't buy into the notion of seeking future enlightenment that much, because it sounded like to me like seeking drugs. It sounded just like, okay, it's keep looking for it, it's going to come. So that part of the message never, thankfully, of course, there was a lot of seeking, but even in the midst of the seeking, I knew that the answer wasn't in the future. Somehow I knew that. And so that helped me bring in the presence practices, like just resting in the now, resting as awareness, looking at my true nature, whatever. And just exploring that for 3 years, probably the first year and a half, I was just reading. I wasn't really doing practices so much, skillful practices. But then for about a year and a half after that, I began to really like throughout the day, just instead of, because I went from like seeking it, like where you can't wait to get to the computer to watch something, or you think you got to go read this book. Or I switched out of that somewhere in that year and a half into, okay, now I'm just going to find this in my direct experience. And all the seeking energy got focused on experiential instead of chasing, you know. And then once that happened, that's where the real shifting started to happen, when I started focusing on just, I am this awareness. This awareness is already here, and thoughts are coming and going, seeing all that. Once I focused on experience, the definitely some realizations happened, a few experiences. But the bigger experience, which is kind of like that pop into the, like, this is all there is, this is it, kind of oneness, non-separation, happened. You mentioned seeking, because at that time, let's say there was like, I think it was in like January of 2007, I had already had like an experience of stillness. So one day something happens, a shift happened, and I just felt like deep, deep stillness. I did not know that that was there, and that was very shocking. How still, there's stillness here. Really settled into that. But then there was still, the mind was saying, you're not there yet. It was like you still have to have a unity experience or oneness, and the mind was still, which I'm grateful, because the mind was telling me there's more to see. But I knew that by following the mind, I was probably just going to keep chasing the future. So I started watching the mind when it would say, you're not there yet, or you got to have a oneness experience, or whatever it would do. I would just kind of watch that thought and let it fall away, no matter what it was telling me at that point about future, because I knew that the answer isn't in the future, it's the shift into this. So just not being enticed by those pointers that said, oh, you're not there yet, or what about this, just letting all those go, 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 go. And then that experience of oneness or non-separation happened. And that was pretty much the end of the spiritual seeking at that point. There's been some other seeking that's come up since then, around just having to heal my chronic pain, like you've had chronic pain. There's a little bit of seeking energy that's come around that, but the spiritual seeking got put to rest in 2007. Since then, it's been more like, well, this is all there is. This awareness is, okay, it's right here. And then in that, there's been some deepening that's happened, but it's not seeking. It's just like shifts in clarity, or traumas that get worked out, like you say, or just no longer having physical pain is a shift. You feel better, you feel clearer, you feel lighter. So all those things have happened since then, but the seeking ended about 2007. I'll end it there. That's believe it or not, that is the short version of the story.
Yeah, I really like the no, I really like your contents and your message always because there's no taboo. I mean, you talk about a lot of you cover a lot of things like trauma or back pain or spiritual bypassing. There's a lot of things, or gaslighting. You talk about stuff that I think you are able to bridge uh practicality and the because I can just sit on an ashram or a satsang where I don't know what the teacher is talking about. I think
Yeah.
being practical, you're one of the speakers who, or the people who can bridge that. And because this is my personal belief or perspective, where if I don't know what the person is talking about without being practical, I will go back to him on another zoom and another zoom until I put him on the
Yeah,
pedestal already. you know
totally. I think that started in law school. When I was in law school, I remember going to the law professors and saying, because when you're an attorney, there's legalese, all these big words, summary judgment and motion to dismiss for blah, 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 whatever. And I went to my law professors and I said, why do we as attorneys have to speak in a way that people, our own clients, don't understand? Like, what is the purpose of that, other than ego? Like, other than sounding important and smart and worth the whatever you're charging per hour? Like, what? Tell me what the benefit is of making everything hard to understand. And they really didn't give me a great answer. And when I got into spirituality, I saw some of the same stuff. It's not that necessarily they're making it more complicated, but some of the cultural stuff, like back in India or China or wherever, the way that they talked about this stuff is just not how we talk today here in the States, or even like some of the spiritual language, not even the old Sanskrit language. It's just some of the spiritual concepts that were talked about 100 years ago. We don't really talk like that anymore. We don't. So how can we message this thing in a way that people can actually hear it and understand it and digest it? And it's funny because my husband is 24, I'm 51, and he even says the way that I talk about awareness now is becoming outdated. He's like, you need to get, because the younger crowd, they don't talk like that. So he's helping me even simplify it more. But yeah, I totally get it. Like listening to people talk about, I mean, I don't know, the divine, the whatever, however they'll conceptualize spirituality. It's like, if I can't touch that directly in my experience, then I have to think about what it means. And then I'm already, show me something, show me some words that I can take those words and immediately check into my own experience and verify what you're saying. And I don't have to. So that's my kind of my attitude around it is, why hide the ball? Like, why do we have to talk about it in ways that are inaccessible,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
exactly. I have the same. You're when you're talking about addiction and all of your journey earlier, I can relate because I also had the same seeking energy, the same when it comes to addiction, not with drugs, but I believe everybody has addiction. They're just maybe in a different stuff. I was in rehab for 6 years, and I was also in AA until sometime I was, what do we call this, facilitating the AA meet,
Oh, yeah.
the NA meeting. I was born Catholic, and then I also went to New Age where there's only love and light, and when you're angry, you're in low vibration, or when you're sad, you're not vibrating high. And I felt like fed up with it
I
because
bet.
you mentioned you also had this video about anger, or sometimes you post like articles about there's nothing bad with anger or sadness.
Mhm.
Because what can you say about bypassing? I think people, because there's a lot of concepts from different communities or different groups of spiritual ideas or people who created this, if you're feeling this, it's not good. With all due respect to the law of attraction believers, I think
Yeah.
when you don't, when you disregard the emotion, it just represses to whatever. I don't know.
I mean, I think you answered it already. Like that, to me, the one of the most compelling things to say these days about bypassing is to refer to the science that I think you and I have talked about it. I've posted all those studies about how science is now finding that repression, emotional repression, is behind a lot of our physical illnesses and our mental health issues. So you said it best. So any spiritual practice that in either way creates repression or helps it along or doesn't get to it would be a possible bypassing right there. And but the thing is, I don't even like to talk about it in abstract terms, because if I put it in my own experience or this experience of people that I've worked with, is there are real life consequences to it. It's like, for example, with addiction, if a lot of people that I see who are addicted, they have emotional repression. There's something they don't want to feel that they've tucked away and they've repressed way down low, and they're digesting something or ingesting something to keep that down. And so there you go, there's a real life consequence. And you see people who are on this path or who have even woken up with addictions because there's probably emotional repression right there. So we could easily say awakening has nothing to do with addiction, and the addiction is just, it's all just conditioning, from the absolute sense, right? It's all just conditioning. So who cares if you, but um, I've never liked that answer because it's I don't know what through seeing through the ego really means, but to me that's ego. The, that is the ego. The ego is trying not to. The pattern of thought is trying not to feel certain things, repressing certain things, looking for something else always. Some So to me, the emotional repression has to be dealt with. But there are real life. I like the real life consequences, like when people check into a treatment center because they're depressed because of repression of anger, for example. Like that's a bypass. So if they don't deal with that, then they're going to have awareness with depression. I don't know how you're going to have awareness with suicidal ideation. You're going to have awareness because I've met people through the years who've had experiences like shifts, but for example, they're suicidal or they are drinking themselves to death. Or so I think a lot of that has to do with emotional repression and bypassing.
Hmm. Yeah,
You know,
yeah, it is. I, it, you mentioned that. I think you also made a video about it where on your channel where you said anger or addiction has nothing to do with awakening because let's say I think that there's a lot of like you can fall into another belief when you're in because awakening has a lot of a lot of what do you call this ideas in the modern day like if you
yeah,
go to a mystic or you go to a shaman or you go to a Catholic priest or you go to a non-dual, there's a lot. They tell you different perspectives of
yeah,
awakening, and it's like it from personal experience. It's like let's say you experience that the self is life is an illusion or the self is not really true. Like the self is just an idea, a mental fabrication. But what about the conditioning? There's still the conditioning. I think it just ends with the you don't exist, whatever. But you don't
yeah,
also. There's also still the mental pattern or the trauma you accumulated from the time you were born until now, right? Like I don't know
yeah,
how to put that into words.
yeah. I agree. When when we talk about there being no self or that the self is a fabrication, the way that I always say that it was always a fabrication. There's never been a self. There was never a self. So it's not like you had a self and then you're going to wake up and you don't have a self. There was never one. There was only just for us, it's like words, pictures, and feelings and sensations arising with to awareness. There's no self in any of that. There's just that pattern of things one after the other. And so addiction, if you start to inquire into it, what you find is there's a lot of selfing in it. You know, it's a strong I thought. So there's a strong preoccupation with the craving. For example, an I thought preoccupation. There's a strong I thought preoccupation with trying to quit, like controlling it, managing it. There's a strong I thought often with some sort of deficiency story that's driving it, helping to drive it. There's a strong I thought there. There's often shame on some level. That's a strong I thought. So there's no self anywhere. There's only these patterns. And so these patterns are operating sometimes in addiction, sometimes they're operating in other, but I don't know where we draw the line and we say, I don't know what people are saying when they say no self because there's so much selfing going on in these things. Like, so you're going to ignore these things even though there's tons of selfing in them, and we're going to say that there's no self somehow outside of that, or like that doesn't include that. I don't know how to not include that in it is what I mean. Like, so it's all, to me, everything is grist for the mill. Like whatever I believe, whatever conditioning is here is explorable. It doesn't mean I'm in inquiry all the time. Most of the time I don't inquire, but if something were to come up, addiction, depression, anything, I would not hesitate to turn inquiry right towards that because there's selfing involved in it.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can ask you like I don't know how to because some people are not into therapy or yeah, I don't think a lot of people are welcome to it, but it's more open these days. But
Yeah.
when I was in your session, when I attended your one-on-one private session with you, I don't think it is. It's very I don't, in a nutshell, I think it's for everybody in a way. It's not like a therapist or will ask you like and then because that's I've been through it the therapy in the past where I feel like the therapist has the answer and I feel like
Oh
the
yeah,
you know that kind of
yeah,
pattern
yeah,
where,
yeah.
where you go there and then you ask the therapist will give you like the tool and then
Yeah.
sometimes prescribe you the medication and stuff like what is like in a maybe you can tell like not really the how you do it like I don't know how to ask the question like like what is in Kiloby inquiries that that like how you what is the unique factor of your because it really helps and it's been talked about by some of my friends and it has helped them but like how is your modality unique when it comes to the addiction or treat or even
Yeah.
pain or emotional resolving something.
One thing I think it's unique in is that it helps us to see the thoughts that aren't conscious to us. So, like speaking about addiction, if I'm going to the refrigerator compulsively to get food, I'm on autopilot if I'm addicted. I don't really see all of the thoughts and beliefs and feelings that are all involved in that. My body just gets up and goes compulsively. So, one of the values of this work, not just on addiction, is literally anything, is the way that the questions are asked. They tend to pull up things pretty thoroughly that you're not conscious of. Um, and yet that are still operating. I always say like an operating system back here. You're believing a lot of stuff and operating according to that, but you don't see it as an object in awareness yet. You don't see that. And so the inquiries are good at pulling up what you can't see and making those objects in awareness. Whereas other styles of inquiry that I've created before didn't have the capacity to do that as much. Like they could definitely get to some deep places, but there was there's more to the unconscious that wasn't getting seen back then. So these inquiries do that. On a simpler note, the inquiries, people like to hear it this way, is we do acknowledge the mind body connection. So mind being words and pictures, body being sensation and emotion. And so with some forms of self inquiry, there's a focus a lot just on the mind, for example. You know, am I this thought? Am I that thought? Or there's in some therapies there's focus just on the body, like just so we're including it because we see the connection between the mind and the body. Whatever, every thought has a certain feeling to it or a sensation to it. It's not like a thought just happening by itself. So when you start tuning into the body tells you a lot about what you believe. You can actually use the somatic experience to show you by asking certain questions to show you what you're believing. And then what's nice about that is that because you're working on the level of the somatic body, when you start asking questions, you're undoing that Velcro effect, the connection between those thoughts and that sensation or emotion, which then allows the emotion or sensation, because it's not connected to anything anymore, to dissolve, to expand, to whatever. So that's one of the unique things about it is it's almost got into it like a built-in embodiment approach. It's already built into it. So that some people will say, well, I woke up and now I have to embody. But with the Kiloby inquiries from the beginning, it's an awakening and an embodiment approach, because you're awakening in the sense that you can see these thoughts aren't you. They're coming and going, even though they say awful things or whatever they say. But there's a seeing that that's not you. There's the awakening. But the other part is the embodiment, because you're exploring the body. You're finding out where you hold contractions or pain or repressed anger and bringing that stuff up. So it has an effect, as you know, on your chronic pain, like it has for me, like it affects that area, not just it's the whole thing, the whole mechanism here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like what do you call this? Like when after my first session with you, I was let's say Facebook comments. When I scroll through Facebook, I'm really highly sensitive to to
Yeah.
whatever comment or something that opposes what I think is true, whatever. And
Hmm.
then it's like what you said, it's autopilot, it's automatic. But after the
Totally.
first one, it's like it wasn't like an effortful action. It was like after the first session, it's like with you, I felt like I suddenly noticed. this is just a thought. Like I didn't like intentionally think about it. Like let's say I was reading a comment, and there's a skillful inquiry that you taught me where I just saw it as letters, and I noticed
Yeah.
my emotion, and it's
Uh-huh.
like automatic. It's like you cannot, you learn it practically effortlessly, something like that. You
Yeah.
will suddenly just go through life seeing it as an object of your awareness.
That's right. Hopefully that's what it does exactly. So Facebook is an interesting thing, is because you can really use that, as you and I've talked about, as a way to wake up, because it's actually mirroring back all our deficiency stories and our shame and whatever else that we've been
Oh, just a second. Yeah, you're talking about Facebook can help with the deficiency stories.
Yeah, well, people are saying, which is okay, it's fine. They're saying I'm taking a social media break or a hiatus, and that's fine. I mean, obviously it's fine, but social media and the internet are part of our lives now, whether we like it or not. And what I would say is use it as a spiritual practice. Like, use it because it's bringing up all of our traumas and our deficiency stories and our shame or whatever else, whatever we're believing when we sit down at a computer or on a phone. That device is literally like a mirror. It's telling us, it's giving us all of our triggers. So if you don't know how to rest with that or see it or skillfully inquire with it, you can get obviously to a place where you want to take a break from social media because it becomes overwhelming. But if you actually use the post to wake up, like to show you your own stuff, and you're able to skillfully inquire into it, you, that changes the game. Because I don't even go on, every now and then I go on to post something on Facebook, but I don't scroll through the news feed, and I don't do those things because of this work. Like, maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. But there's a way to be free in the midst of it instead of trying to run away from it. That's what I'm saying. You can use that.
Yeah, exactly. It it's
Yeah.
it's creating, it's bringing up like your most treasured beliefs and pain, and it's helping make it explicit. Like it's bringing out the ones you shoved under the rug, and it at some point, yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
It's I like your point where you said if it feels overwhelming, you can take a break, but but I think, like for me, I used to do that hiatus, that because if it I feel like everybody's opinionated, but
Hmm.
later on, when you're on a hiatus, you can inquire that at that in when
Yes.
why am I so affected by what she said, and then
Right.
right, and then it brings out answers that you didn't even saw before. when it
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if you, like, one of the green flags I have with with teachers, or with speakers, or with people who I'm having sessions with, is if I don't have, if one session helped and I can apply it immediately with my with my day-to-day life, that's a green flag. Because the red flag for me is when the first time I don't understand, there's a grasping that, like, a need to go back to your upgraded session, or you know how cults are made, when you
Hmm.
until you cannot get out of it anymore. Because
Right.
I don't know if you can talk about, because there's a lot of people who do that. I'll be straightforward, and a lot of people cannot get out of the group because it's so
Yeah.
rigid. It's so rigid already.
Well, if you see the, like you said, if you see that the thing is held in the teacher or the leaders of a group, and you think that they've got it and you've got to hang out with them long enough to get it, then that might be what happens, that you're gonna hang out there quite a while and not feel like you can leave because of just the way that those groups are sometimes set up. But even with our community, the facilitators and myself know how to use these skills. So we know that there's going to be a certain amount of people who come to us and who have to keep coming back for a while until they get it. But the whole point of this work is that once you know how to do it, it's actually very simple.
Mm.
Then you don't need the leader or you don't need the teacher anymore. You've got that in your own experience. So that's the only thing I would say about it, is just how we're trying to build something different, you
Mm.
know. Whereas if I go see a teacher and the teacher never gives me a solid course in non-duality, they say there's no practice, there's no method, but doesn't give me anything to apply to my life, then I'm left to come back to that teacher either to try to extract something from there that I can't find, or by believing if I just keep listening to the teacher talk about that state, somehow that will do it. And I've never been someone who will set, it's almost, to me, it's like waiting around to catch a cold or something. Like, like I'm just going to keep showing up with the teacher. Then one day, hopefully, like catching a cold, grace will hit me. And I think there's some things that we can do to make the awakening, like to set the ground for that. We don't have to just be a prisoner to repeatedly going back to listening to a teacher forever. Like we have ways now of empowering people to look on their own, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's like I don't know. You mentioned it perfectly. Like because when it comes to you, you are able to give tangible the tangible stuff that because I'm still living in a practical conventional
Yeah,
world
yeah,
where I need that, and I think anger, addiction, it's gonna be part of our human experience. I believe like it
yes,
can just it can just be managed through time, but I
yeah.
don't think people have, maybe they have the idea, but I don't think someone is living in bliss or in unity. As long as you're embodied, you're subject to you're subject to emotion or problem.
Disease. Yeah, yes,
It builds
yeah.
to
Life. That is another way that I think bypassing can happen, is that, everybody wants to, or not everybody, but people want to retreat away from life, like away from social media, away from work, away from everything and everyone, and being in a room, like, but you said it best, is like, that's not the world that we actually live in. Like in the modern day, we don't live in that world where we can live and retreat constantly. And in any event, what would be the point of waking up if I can't go and engage with the world then in the freedom? Why would if I have to stay in solitude just to enjoy my freedom, then I don't know how free that is. So why not let it be a living meditation, a living inquiry, and just go and live life, engage with life, because we are anyway. And then you use the tools to wake up in the middle of that instead of retreating away from it. That's how I think one way of bypassing happens, is that people will retreat. They'll go to retreats, or they will retreat, and they'll get they used to call me all the time and they'll say, hey, I just went to see this teacher, and I got blown open, like and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so when's the other shoe going to drop? Because you're going to go back to work Tuesday, and then there's your wife and your kids. And so inevitably they would call, a few days later after they got home, or a couple of weeks, and say, yeah, I've lost that, whatever that was. And I think that's what it is. I mean, I think it's nice to go have a retreat and have a blown open experience, but if you can't integrate that into your regular life, then it's just an experience. It's all that it is. And then you can get hooked into that, right? And then keep wanting that experience and that retreat. And then you lose the fact that the freedom is always here. It's our experience always, like no matter where you go, it's awareness is here. We're awake in the midst of everything. So that to me is a juicier freedom than retreating away, actually
oh,
being in life fully.
oh yeah, you said it perfectly. It's the freedom to be, or the release of the dissolving of whatever your idea of life is, because when you retreat your way out of life, when you go back to work, there's your boss or
Yes.
there's your friends who doesn't resonate with what you're saying, or and then it's a setup, it's a setup for another trauma or another disappointment that you need to work on
Yeah.
later, something like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I,
Exactly.
I don't know if I can ask you like then if it like what is in your own how you put it into words, like what is awakening, because some people can word it differently, but I feel like you can bridge. I don't know, maybe I'll just ask it. How, what is awakening in your own words or experience maybe?
I think it probably depends on what tradition you're talking, but generally in the awareness style traditions, I think what it means is the shifting, essentially shifting from believing that you're the story to recognizing the presence here, however you want to say that. There's something here that's awake to the story. There's something here that's already awake. That recognition seems to be what I would say is awakening, but I would say that that's different than embodiment for me, is the way I would say it. But the awakening is that shift, whether it happens gradually or suddenly or however it happens, where your identity, how do you say it, who you think you are, or shifts. What you think you are shifts from I'm the story, I'm my name, I'm this, to I'm this awakeness. Like, that's how I would say it.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the no, I think that's perfect. That's just a simple that's just a simple straightforward in a nutshell what awakening is, because I think in my from speaking from my experience, the story of trauma still continues because it you cannot just say there's no me and then the trauma is gone. I can say that
Right.
the
Or
story,
addiction or anything else.
addiction, or like I'm naturally an anxious person. Like I had social anxiety when I was in college. Whenever there's crowd, I get a lot of massive anxiety. The only thing is right now I see the anxiety story. It's still there. It's not like it's not shoved under the rug. It's still there, but the only difference, I know it's not me. It's present in awareness, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Hmm.
Good.
Yeah. I I don't know. Maybe one of my last questions is, I don't know if I'm a seeker right now, and I have that. I'm really in deep, like what would you tell me? Like, or I'm in a place where a lot of people are saying different things because that's what exhausted me. This I was, but I did it to myself. Like I was sitting on someone's Zoom meeting, and then the next day somebody said exactly the opposite of that, and then the
Oh
next
yeah,
day
yeah.
it was contradicted by somebody, and I was like in the middle of, then what's the truth? Like, then what is I don't know now what to where to go. I feel like lost. Like if I'm someone who feels lost, like what would you tell me? So,
Well, it would depend on why you felt lost, because there's different ways that that shows up. So you mean lost in the seeking, or tell me exactly where the question's coming from, and I'll probably answer it better.
yeah, I think
Like, lost in what way?
in the context of find oh yeah, in the seeking, in the seeker's perspective, where I've devoured all the books already. I've gotten
Yeah.
all, and then I don't know, then I'm left with who's really telling what. Like I don't know, something like that. Like I'm left with confusion after something.
Yeah. I think I can answer that like in a practical way. Um, if you're a seeker of enlightenment at this point, you've probably heard enough to know, even if it doesn't completely make sense, that it's not in the future, it's not coming down the road, and it's not in the next second, and you're not close to it. None of those thoughts. And what I would say is just turn your attention towards like all these thoughts that come up that say things like that. if you can start noticing them, seeing them as an object in your awareness and just letting them fall away, and then looking from what's awake, just coming back to that, standing as what's awake here in the moment, just resting there for a bit, and then go about your day. And throughout the day, let awareness be your home. Like you rest as that. You I don't know how to say it, but you see yourself as what's awake. You see, that's how, what, just resting as that instead of I am these thoughts. But especially the thoughts about future, the ones that say I'm almost there, or even that I'm lost, or anything that it says, if you can just turn that attention right towards that and just let that fall, let every one of them fall, and then shift back to presence. Because the whole enlightenment teachings, are essentially, the awakening was, are speaking about that shift, from that shift right there. So why not just start making that shift if you're at a place where you've read a lot of books? Because what else can the books give you at this point? The books are clear. Like there's some good books out there, and we're not lacking information around this topic. What we're lacking is whatever it takes within each of us to shift, to see what it's being pointed to, and to literally in your own experience shift from following those carrots as they come up to watching those carrots fall and dissolve, and then shifting into presence. That's what, frankly, that's what works for me. So that's what I'm going to share with everybody else, because that's exactly, I felt like a lost seeker at a certain point, because until I saw that all those future thoughts are doing nothing but obscuring the fact that there's presence already here. They're not really obscuring that, they're arising and falling within it. But when you believe them and you follow them, it feels like they're obscuring the recognition of presence, but they're really not. So as you sort of notice them, and whatever's noticing them is the awareness, whatever sees them, and then whatever, when they fall away, what's here and awake is the awareness, and keeping that continuous recognition going throughout the day, coming back to that until it's more, until, like they say, you're abiding in it, or whatever, you've shifted
Oh.
um, mostly out of that. But as you said, that doesn't mean traumas won't come up, or addictions, but essentially you can shift that identity that way, and then you may have to clean up your act, like if you've got, but there's inquiry for that can come later. But in terms of just the seeker, that's what I would say to them.
Yeah, that's I really love what you said when you everything you said. I really love it. But when you said let awareness be your home, it's it feels really good when you said that. It something I'm very visual. I just suddenly this idea of you're always at home, but when
Mm-hmm.
trauma came and then addictions came, you thought you that was your house. But if you recognize that awareness is your home, then trauma is just a visitor. Addiction is just a
Yes,
visitor that
I
comes
like
and
that actually.
goes.
Yeah, that's great. That's how I would talk about it. They're just trauma. It's all words, pictures, feelings, and sensations. So right now, the story may be I'm seeking enlightenment. Those are the words and pictures and feelings, sensations. Watch those as those fall away, and that'll show you the space that remained, the presence. And then in that, you may see some other stuff like trauma. Like once the seeking really starts to quiet, you'll see whatever's there that has been hidden or repressed away from the seeking. The thing that we were trying to get away from will start showing up there. But then you'll have that awareness there, the capacity to be with it. Um, so yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know if you have upcoming events or maybe if people want to work with you, like how can they reach out to you or how can they contact you with if they want to connect?
Yeah, just go to kiloby.com. There's a contact form there. There's also a page that talks about sessions with me. And if you're interested in training, which would be training to become a facilitator, contact us at kilobyscenter@gmail.com, and we'll talk to you about that. You can train to be a certified facilitator of this work too. So kilobyscenter@gmail.com, and kiloby.com to go just to explore the work. Not if you're not interested in training, you just want to go deeper. You can find sessions there. You can contact me there. You can find other facilitators there. You can read blogs, things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's nice. Well, yeah, thank you so much for spending time with me today, despite
Yeah, thanks for having me.
sunny weather. Thank you so much. Have a good
Yep.
afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.